George Lucas's big-budget space opera was an unprecedented, unfathomable achievement back in 1977, and one which of course kickstarted the Star Wars we all know and love today. And though much has been written over the years about the film's high-pressure production and how often it flirted with disaster, you probably haven't heard these incredible behind-the-scenes factoids and tidbits. I'm Ewan, you're watching What Culture Star Wars, and here are 20 things you didn't know about Star Wars A New Hope. Number 20. George Lucas took a lower salary in exchange for full merchandising rights. In what must surely be one of the smartest business moves in Hollywood history, George Lucas made the decision to accept a lower salary of just $150,000 for Star Wars on one condition: he retained the merchandising and sequel rights for the IP. At the time, this actually seemed like a slam dunk for Fox, given that movie merch had never been a colossal money spinner, and they had very little faith in Star Wars' commercial prospects anyway. But of course, Star Wars soon enough became an unprecedented phenomenon, kickstarting an unheard of demand for action figures, lunchboxes, and so on and so forth. Between 1978 and 1979 alone, Star Wars sold $100 million worth of toys, a figure that kept snowballing until it reached upwards of $3 billion per year in recent times. Quick check, how many death sticks could you buy with that? I'm jealous. Number 19. Brian De Palma helped write the title crawl. Legendary director Brian De Palma was part of a small group of elite filmmakers, also including Steven Spielberg and Francis Ford Coppola, who provided feedback to Lucas during post-production on A New Hope. Curiously, De Palma had an especially significant impact on the film's very first moments, helping Lucas come up with a more concise and attention-grabbing opening title crawl. Initially, Lucas's crawl was 6 paragraphs consisting of 4 sentences each, until an exasperated De Palma insisted he cut the spiel down to a more manageable length. De Palma, never one to mince words, allegedly called the crawl gibberish and helped Lucas ruthlessly cut through the guff to correct the crawl used in the final film. Number 18. George Lucas originally prevented Harrison Ford from auditioning. Can you believe it? Lucas originally didn't want Harrison Ford to play Han Solo. His reasoning? Ford had a small role in Lucas's acclaimed second feature film American Graffiti back in 1973, and the director wanted to use an entirely new roster of names and faces for Star Wars. However, Ford, who was working as a carpenter at the time, agreed to help Lucas audition other actors for Star Wars' roles. After hearing Ford read Solo's lines, however, Lucas decided to ditch his rule and hire the actor to play the now iconic smuggler turned rebel hero. Number 17. The original editor was fired during post-production. Star Wars' post-production process was a well-noted nightmare, to the extent that original editor John Jimpson, who had worked on films like Zulu, A Hard Day's Night, and Frenzy, was even fired during the cutting process. Jimpson, who wasn't Lucas's first choice to edit the film anyway, cut Star Wars for its first work-in-progress screening, which was a reportedly disastrous mess due to poor pacing, an incoherent narrative, and an excess of expository dialogue. Lucas responded by firing Jimpson and instead asking his wife Marcia to reshape the film, with the help of co-editors Paul Hirsch and Richard Chew. Number 16. Alec Guinness took a cut of George Lucas's royalties. You're probably already aware that Obi-Wan Kenobi actor Alec Guinness had complicated feelings about acting in Star Wars, deeming the material fairy tale rubbish, though nevertheless believing that it would indeed be commercially successful. Guinness's involvement was important enough to Lucas that he agreed to give him 2% of his own royalties to the film, and as added payment for some revisions Guinness made to the script, eventually bumped the number to 2.25%. This ensured Guinness became enormously wealthy throughout the decades as Star Wars' popularity soared, and as of 2009, his estate had earned a reported $95 million from the deal. Not bad for fairy tale rubbish, eh, Alec? Number 15. George Lucas deliberately avoided a G rating. It isn't often that you hear about filmmakers deliberately attempting to avoid a more permissive content rating, but that's exactly what happened with George Lucas and Star Wars. At one stage in time, A New Hope was seemingly destined for a G rating, but because this connoted a movie that was squeaky clean and wholly sanitized for the younglings, Lucas allegedly added some mild language to the script to boost it to a PG rating. Ooh. The words hell and damn were added to get the film away from the stereotypes associated with the G rating, which is kind of weird anyway given that Star Wars is so obviously oriented towards children in the first place. Number 14. The original script was almost 300 pages long. In its embryonic stages, George Lucas's early script for Star Wars was between 250 to 300 pages long, the result of spending a year forming his ideas into a semi-coherent story. Even when it dawned on Lucas that this would simply be untenable as one feature film, he was extremely reluctant to cut anything out. And so, he decided instead to split the script into a whole trilogy, with A New Hope adapting the first third or so of that script, and with the hope that he'd get the chance to make 2 further films in the future. Number 13. It opened in just 32 theaters in North America. Fox's concern that Star Wars would be a box office failure was only exacerbated by the fact that less than 40 cinemas actually committed to screening it on its release week at the end of May 1977. On Wednesday, May 25th, Star Wars opened to a pitiable 32 cinemas, a figure that seems practically inconceivable for any blockbuster today, before opening on an additional 8 later in the week, bringing the first week total to around 40. However, the strong word-of-mouth response and incredible per-screen box office performance quickly caused the film's demand to surge with exhibitors, and throughout the summer of 1977, up to 200 extra screens were added in North America alone on a weekly basis to accommodate its popularity. During its peak in August and September 1977, Star Wars was playing on 1,000 screens throughout the US and Canada, which led to it overtaking Jaws as the highest-grossing film in North America within 6 months of its modest initial release. Number 12. John Williams almost didn't score the film. It's absolutely impossible to separate Star Wars from its wonderful composer, John Williams. The man is Star Wars, and yet George Lucas originally had something else in mind for the series' soundscape. Initially, Lucas planned to score the film only with existing classical music, in something of an homage to Stanley Kubrick doing the exact same thing on 2001: A Space Odyssey. That all changed, however, when Steven Spielberg introduced Lucas to Williams, and Williams convinced Lucas he could bring the classical romantic aspect to the film the director was craving. Number 11. The real reason George Lucas made Greedo shoot first. Of all the changes George Lucas made for the 1997 special editions of the original Star Wars trilogy, the most infamously egregious is surely the altering of the Han Greedo Cantina shootout to have Greedo shoot his gun first, so Han only kills him in self-defense and not, cold-blooded survival. The reasons for why this was a poor decision on Lucas's part are well documented, and though most simply assume that Lucas changed the scene to represent Han as a less ambiguous, more clean-cut character, the answer is actually a little more interesting than that. In Lucas's own words, Han Solo was going to marry Leia, and you look back and say, should he be a cold-blooded killer? Because I was thinking mythologically. Should he be a cowboy? Should he be John Wayne? And I said, yeah, he should be John Wayne. And when you're John Wayne, you don't shoot people first, you let them have the first shot. It's a mythological reality that we hope our society pays attention to. That in mind, you can kind of get what Lucas was going for. It's just that the edit makes the whole scene look awful, and besides, Han is way cooler with the added original darkness that shooting Greedo first provided. Number 10. Fox hated the title. Star Wars may be one of the most iconic and recognizable movie titles of all time, immediately telling you what the film is about, but during production, Fox weren't happy with it at all. Furthermore, they actually wanted to change the name, believing that Star Wars wouldn't appeal to women due to the emphasis on both sci-fi and warfare. Joke's on them, women have been in Star Wars' fandom for decades now, so suck it up, Fox. Hilariously, it's also alleged that focus groups who read the title assumed the film was a dramatization of Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton's tumultuous marriage. Oh god, imagine walking into the cinema with that film in your head. Number 9. The Force could originally be harnessed by ancient relics. Though Lucas eventually settled on the Force as a physically intangible object, earlier drafts of the script included a quote-unquote Kyber crystal, a Holy Grail-esque artifact capable of harnessing and manipulating the Force. This is of course before kyber crystals went on to become the power source for all lightsabers, but still, it's pretty interesting to see how Lucas developed the concept of the Force over the course of the film's development. Number 8. David Prowse didn't know his Darth Vader voice was going to be dubbed over. Yikes. As with Alec Guinness, much has been written over the years about late Darth Vader actor David Prowse's fraught relationship with the franchise, namely the fact he apparently hadn't been told his voice would be dubbed over by James Earl Jones. Prowse's thick Bristolian accent led to him being called Darth Farmer on set, and the distracting nature of the accent is apparently what prompted Lucas to redub Prowse in post. Prowse insisted throughout his life that he was never told this would happen and didn't know about Jones's voiceover role until he saw the final film, which has gotta hurt. Prowse at least had the self-awareness to appreciate his accent wasn't a great fit, though nevertheless expected that he'd get a chance to redub his own voice before another actor was brought in to do it. Number 7. The C-3PO suit was a nightmare for Anthony Daniels and the crew. In addition to the production's myriad other woes, George Lucas also faced an uphill struggle realizing what would ultimately become one of his most beloved creations, C-3PO. For starters, actor Anthony Daniels was injured the first time he tried on the suit before shooting, his left foot being stabbed by a sharp, shattered piece of the left leg. Daniels was also unable to sit down in the suit, and so during breaks between filming typically leaned against a board instead. For the scenes where C-3PO is sat down, the suit actually had to be partially disassembled. Worse still, Daniels had virtually no visibility while in the suit due to the costume's eyes being sprayed gold in order to prevent corrosion. But the character also presented additional issues for other aspects of the production. Moving around in the suit proved so noisy that the dialogue of both Daniels and any other cast member in the vicinity was rendered unusable and had to be redubbed in post. Number 6. The film was passed on by United Artists, Universal, and Disney. Before Fox stepped up and agreed to produce the film, Lucas had shopped Star Wars around to a number of studios, all of which passed on it. United Artists were the first to say no, reportedly being impressed with Lucas's vision but refusing to stump up the necessary cash to make it a reality. Next up was Universal, who believed in the commercial viability of the concept but doubted that Lucas, who was of course untested in the big budget game at that point, was the right man to execute it. But the most curious rejection came from Disney, which led Lucas to Fox when the project finally came together. Given that Disney ended up paying $4 billion to acquire the Star Wars property in 2012, they could have probably saved themselves a fortune by getting it on the ground floor decades earlier. Number 5. Dozens of name actresses auditioned for Princess Leia. Despite there being considerable industry skepticism about A New Hope, it's still little surprise that the role of Princess Leia was intensely sought out by literally dozens of well-known and on-the-rise actresses. Just a handful of the actors who were either considered for or pursued the role include Karen Allen, Christine Baranski, Kim Basinger, Glenn Close, Gina Davis, Farrah Fawcett, Angelica Huston, Margot Kidder, Kathleen Turner, Sigourney Weaver, Jodie Foster, and even Meryl Streep. While there's little denying the incredible talents who could have played Leia, there's no replacing Carrie Fisher's indelible for-the-ages performance. We miss you, General. Number 4. The Millennium Falcon's design was inspired by a hamburger? George Lucas labored over the Millennium Falcon's design considerably during pre-production, even giving the original elongated design a drastic overhaul after realizing he'd unconsciously ripped off the Eagle transporter ships from the sci-fi series Space 1999. The inspiration for the Falcon's design ended up coming from a most unexpected place, a hamburger Lucas was eating. When he looked at the burger, he realized the shape of the half-eaten meat patty would help the Falcon stand out in a sea of familiar sci-fi vessels. Legend persists that the cockpit was also inspired by an olive that was on the plate next to the burger. Now that is a tasty burger. Number 3. Peter Cushing filmed his role in just 5 days. Peter Cushing's bone-chilling performance as Grand Moff Tarkin is among A New Hope's most iconic and unforgettable, and while not exactly a huge role, you still might be surprised by just how quickly Cushing filmed it. The legendary actor shot his part in just 5 days, from May 8th to May 12th of 1976, and given his esteem compared to most of the cast, he was able to command a cool salary of £2,000 per day. Today, that would amount to a staggering daily salary of almost £15,000, but such is the cost of attracting prestige talent to a film about space wizards that rate had to be matched. Nevertheless, Cushing absolutely earned every single penny. Number 2. George Lucas used rejected plot ideas for his future film Willow. Lucas quite sensibly threw out a number of his original ideas for Star Wars, such as having Han Solo be a noseless, green-skinned Duralian with gills. But perhaps the most interesting and not terrible of Lucas's discarded ideas is one he ended up recycling for another of his projects. At one stage, Lucas imagined Luke Skywalker and his aunt and uncle as dwarves, and though this was obviously thrown out, the filmmaker returned to the idea for the 1988 fantasy film Willow, which he both produced and conceived the story for. A commercial success despite mixed reviews, Willow has endured as a cult classic, while production is due to begin later this year on a follow-up series for Disney+, also starring Warwick Davis. And number 1. It didn't premiere in China until 2015. Tough though it might be to believe, A New Hope never actually had an official premiere in China due to the nation's intensely strict ban on Western cultural influences at the time of its original release. And though copies of the film became available on home video in the years that followed, the first Star Wars didn't get the full theatrical premiere treatment until 2015, almost 40 years after it first hit screens in the West. The entire original trilogy was screened for the first time as a part of the 2015 Shanghai International Film Festival. The fact that Star Wars doesn't have decades of cultural penetration in China explains why even the recent sequel trilogy didn't drum up as much business in the region. The fond nostalgia for the IP just isn't there. And those were 20 things you hopefully didn't know about A New Hope, but now do. Let me know your most interesting fact about the film down in the comments below, and please don't forget to like the video as it really does help us out, and maybe consider subscribing to What Culture Star Wars too. We'd be honored if you would join us, but regardless, I've been Ewan, may the Force be with you, and I will see you soon. Bye!